Hey guys, in this episode of Macro Crypto, we're going to be taking a look at some of the biggest stories and trends in the three primary areas of price analysis. So that's fundamental analysis, sentimental analysis, which has been pretty big over the last month, and technical analysis. So we're going to be covering all three bases and giving a little bit of an outlook on what we see coming in the near future. So taking a look at fundamental analysis first, and what we saw last month was a lot of the instability in the Middle East. We saw the potential war with Iran. That was the big trending news topic. There were some regulatory things that were coming out, but the war was the big news item, and that was having a positive impact on the price of Bitcoin. Now what we're seeing is everything is really about the coronavirus. It seems to be a much bigger story, and it's having a very big impact on the markets. We're seeing the stock market is at its lowest point since August of last year, a 6-month low. The virus hysteria is really adding to the impressive performance of the price of gold, which is at a 7-year high, which is adding to the speculation of a potential looming recession, as we're pretty overdue from our last one in 2008, and the markets have really been going up for a long time. We're due for a bit of a correction, so we're starting to see a lot of money that's moving into more safe havens like precious metals. It's difficult to make a connection between the coronavirus fears and the price of Bitcoin. They don't tend to be correlated, it seems, but this was an interesting article with Forbes and talking about how the US is very worried now about Bitcoin. You saw a lot of rhetoric coming out of government agencies basically downplaying the significance of cryptocurrencies. Now we're seeing that really heightened, and as it should be, because I think one of the big things that you're seeing is a powerhouse, a world power like China is really moving, forward at a much faster pace than what we were seeing with all of the red tape and bureaucracy that we see with the US. Now, if you look at, the situation with China, they are in a communist country where they can just do things as they please. If they want to move forward on a particular subject, they just do it. And, a good example of that is like with the coronavirus and whatnot, they're building hospitals in like a week or two, like just out of the blue. They are just clearing the land, building giant hospitals. You would never really see this in the US. Probably the response you would see from the US is something like FEMA, where they bring in a lot of portable, situations to deal with that type of crisis. But China, there's been all of these kind of memes where, they are able to take like a sinkhole and they can fix the entire road in like a day or two. And that's just kind of a testament to how fast the Chinese government and also some of the different Asian communities react in a situation like this. They are much faster and much more forward thinking. And I don't feel like we're seeing that from the US. I don't think that there's too many opinions, too much bureaucracy, too many people fighting about who is right. And at the end of the day, we're seeing some of these other world leaders and powers are basically progressing. And when you see the situation where the dollar is not the reserve currency anymore, as Gary Vaynerchuk put it so eloquently, it's like things get very weird very fast.
So naive about blockchain. Blockchain undermines the whole thing. If blockchain wins, then the only thing countries have are weapons. Because if you take away the peer-to-peer infrastructure of currency, it gets real weird real fast. Whoever the Illuminati are, they're not about blockchain.
We have yet to go through a recession in the age of cryptocurrencies, because if you remember, cryptocurrencies were born out of the 2008 financial crisis. And I think this is an interesting tweet here. This is just looking at the Fed going wild and their money printing, especially here since that recession. We might be in a massive, massive bubble. There's been a lot of people that have speculated that this next recession, this incoming recession that will happen at some point here in the near future, is going to be much more severe than the 2008 crisis. And you want to be prepared when you're looking at some of those scenarios. This is an interesting way to look at some of the wild speculation with the price of Bitcoin. When people start talking about $100,000 Bitcoin, $1 million Bitcoin, you know, where does that come from? Well, if you look at some of the history of the exponential growth with the halvening and the little bit of the delayed response. So if we look at 2012, you know, we saw there was a massive run up until the end of 2013. And, you know, we saw it again after the halvening in 2016. It took about another year for that to really impact the price of Bitcoin where it peaked. And this is just taking the data from the 2012, you know, run up, and this is how you get to $1 million Bitcoin. Just kind of taking some of that same data, maybe a little bit of a delayed response, so maybe it won't happen this year, but with all of the things that are impacting, you know, the overall economies and the financial instability, you know, we might be looking at $1 million Bitcoin by next year. And that's how you get there. And part of that is going to play into a lot of the things that we've seen in the global economies. And if we have some sort of really massive recession, that could have a huge impact on the price of Bitcoin. And that's why fundamental analysis, the big news stories, things like this will always trump sentimental analysis, or how traders really feel about the market, as well as technical analysis. Switching our focus to sentimental analysis, if you remember from my last video, one of the things that I mentioned was the overall sentiment, the feeling was a little bit bullish at the time. And that has continued, and if anything, it's gotten quite a bit stronger with a little bit of a recent dip over the last week or so as it seemed to kind of top out. But this is a great website to take a look at some of the, you know, the ways that traders are trading inside OKEX, which is a pretty, you know, major exchange, and gives some great data when you're looking at some of the top, you know, traders and some of the biggest whales inside that exchange and what they're doing. And one of the things you see here recently is in, you know, the last little bit, you know, even if we just kind of zoom out here a little bit, this is one of the first times I've really seen this kind of switch to a short position. So I think, you know, this right here is telling me that in the short term, we might be looking for a little bit of a retracement, and perhaps that might take us into the high 9,000s, perhaps back into the 8,000s. There's you know, this progression and kind of this overall feeling with a lot of the people that I've been following that, you know, people are getting very optimistic, and sometimes you need to kind of, you know, drown some of that out and see what people are actually doing and how they're actually trading. You know, this is taking a look at BitMEX, the #1 exchange in the world, has you know, a much higher percentage of people in long positions. I mean, look at that. Bitfinex is at 90% longs. You know, quite a bit of a difference with Binance, and so there's quite a bit of difference between the different exchanges when you're looking at some of that. The greed and fear index is another thing to kind of look at, just kind of the overall feeling, and it takes a lot of different factors and kind of compounds them and aggregates them into a little bit of a score. And we've been seeing that, you know, over, you know, this past month, it's been steadily increasing with a little bit of a correction here over the past week or so. If we're looking at the Bitcoin terms, when people are searching for this on Google, typically if you see this come up quite a bit, we're seeing a little bit more interest in Bitcoin from the non-crypto community, more of the mainstream community of people wanting to get into crypto. So there was a little bit of a spike at times when we saw the price come up a little bit, but it's been in a little bit of a decline here. Now, taking a look at price history, I'm just going to take a look at really the big trends, looking at some of the bigger time frames and some of the more common indicators. There's a lot of stuff that when you really start diving into technical analysis, but I want to keep this pretty straightforward, just looking at some of the major trends that we're seeing, the macro trends. And what we saw from last month is we saw 4 red candles, and we were currently in a red candle. That ended up turning green for the month of January, and now in the month of February, we're seeing a pretty bullish candle. So that is giving us a very bullish reversal pattern indication based on the monthly. This was very bearish when we were looking at this last month. Now, if we look at some of the other time factors, if we zoom into the weekly and the 3-day, if you remember on those were starting to turn bullish. They looked bullish when we were looking at some of the overall interpretations of what that price history was giving us. And that ended up playing out. It has been fairly bullish, and we might see a little bit of indecisiveness right now. This has no clear indication on, you know, which way this is going to go right now. It's you know, this is perhaps a little bit of a choppy period on the weekly. It looks like according to the MACD, we might still have some room to go up. The money flow is coming down. If we take a look at the 3-day, it is starting to become more bearish, and we're seeing that playing out in the money flow index, and we are very close to a bearish cross on the MACD. If we're looking at the daily has been in a very bullish trend ever since the low 7,000s, all the way up to 10,500. So it's been really interesting, scenario to see. I was thinking that we might see a little bit more of, some choppiness in this range, but it just continued to go up and up and up. And so, about a 20 to 30% price rise is what we saw. And we're now kind of in a situation over the last week. We're seeing a little bit more of a correction and a little bit more of a bearish trend. So that's a broad overview looking at some of the primary areas of price analysis. The fundamental, the news is looking a little bit more bullish, with some of the negative news out there with the coronavirus, the wars, that sort of thing tends to have a little bit more of a positive impact on the price of cryptocurrencies as a whole. And that's kind of what we've seen over the last month that may have really impacted the price. It may not be correlated or not. We're seeing the sentimental analysis is really starting to get increasingly more bullish as we approach the halvening. Now, typically, as I showed you before, that priced in effect doesn't really happen until much later after, but we do tend to see a little bit more of a bullish impact on the price of Bitcoin as that happens. And I think if we are able to cross over 14K again, which was kind of the local high that we had seen in the summer of 2019, we might start to see a little bit more of a mainstream interest in cryptocurrencies as a whole, which could really start to light the fire, and that could be a very bullish sign for that time period, especially if there's a lot of world events that are impacting the price of Bitcoin. But in the near future, what I'm seeing is a little bit more of a consolidation, perhaps down into the low 9,000s, upper 8,000s. That's kind of reflected in the sentimental analysis as well as the technical analysis in the short term. But I think once we kind of reach some of those levels and consolidate around that price point, I think we are set to really make some higher highs to push 11 or 12K perhaps in the next month. So we'll see how that plays out, but let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you found this helpful, be sure to leave me a like, be sure to subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video.